Significant challenges to the teleological argument have come from the Scottish scholar David Hume. His work, Dialogues, was published posthumously after 25 years of work, because he was concerned about persecution from religious groups. Even after it was published, it was written in the form of dialogues, or conversations between three characters, and it is ambiguous which view was Hume's. Most scholars agree that the sceptic Philo is most likely to be Hume's view. The teleological argument is presented very fairly by Hume via Cleanthes and uses numerous analogies to demonstrate the marks of comparison. The teleological argument notes in particular the elements of the world or universe that are like machines. The analogical claim of the teleological argument is simply that similar effects imply similar causes. And Hume says the curious adapting of means to ends throughout all nature resembles exactly, though it much exceeds, the productions of human contrivance, of human design, thought, wisdom, and intelligence. Since therefore the effects resemble each other, we are led to infer, by the rules of analogy, that the causes also resemble, and that the author of nature is somewhat similar to the mind of man, though possessed of much larger faculties, proportional to the grandeur of the work which he has executed. By this argument, a posteriori, we do prove at once the existence of a deity and his similarity to human mind and intelligence. Hume's challenges are presented here in no particular order, and the order is different depending on which scholar you're reading about Hume. Our primary challenge that we will be dealing with from Philo is that similar effects actually do not imply similar causes. I know, for instance, how a house is designed and built, and I know that a universe shares some characteristics with a house, such as obeying regular laws. But they are very different things, and the similarity may actually be quite weak. No analogy, says Hume, from the world would really be adequate then, since the universe is, as far as we are aware, unique. Hume's argument extends here to an argument that we've heard before in the challenge to the cosmological argument from Hume and Russell, to name but two. The fallacy of composition is the mistake that the teleological argument makes when it says that because parts of the universe contain certain characteristics, this can then be extended to the whole. So just because parts of the universe may well show design, this does not necessarily mean that we can say the same about the whole of the universe. And I might make the comparison, just because I have seen one Mexican wearing a sombrero doesn't mean that the whole of Mexico must wear sombreros. Hume goes on to suggest that if we are making these kind of analogies, why stick with the comparison with a machine? There could be better analogies. For instance, the world may share more characteristics with a vegetable such as a carrot rather than a watch or a house. If this is the case, then we need not resort to intelligence as the governing principle. It could be something instead like regeneration or growth that accounts for the universe, in the same way that it could account for the carrot. In fact, says Philo, we have no experience of world making, so who are we to assume that we know what explains it? We cannot be certain of how sound this analogy is, because we have no evidence or experience of it coming into being, or of anything else the same coming into being. As we have said already, the teleological argument claims that similar effects imply similar causes. We have shown that Hume refutes this, but let's assume for the moment that this is the case. Let's assume that because there are marks of design in watches that can be shared or noticed in the world, then we can infer a designer. Hume claims that this is an anthropomorphite argument because it makes God, the designer, into another kind of human. If we press the analogy and say that there are marks of design, so therefore there must be a designer, then we can conclude that the designer of the earth must be similar to the designer of the watch. Thus, because the watch designers are imperfect, the universe designer must be too. Because such watch designers make many watches, or a house requires many designers working collaboratively, then this could be true of the universe designer too. What would prevent the designer of the universe being a retired god whose universe was his last job that he did in a bit of a rush, or an apprentice god who was just practicing before going on to do it properly? In fact, Hume went on to note that the effect and cause should be in proportion to each other. A finite flawed watch would come from a finite flawed designer, so equally the universe must indicate the qualities of God. He couldn't be infinite or perfect because the universe isn't either of these things in itself. In fact, if we extend this further, we can point out that God could be evil, since evil and immorality exist within the world. Or God must be caused, since designers are usually caused. This would lead, of course, then to an logical infinite regress of cause and not answer what brought everything about in the first place. Having shown the inadequacy of the analogies in the teleological argument, Hume goes on to point out that there is good philosophical reason for doubting the conclusion that there must be a designer to explain the order and regularity in the universe. There could be other explanations for it. For instance, it might be as the result of necessity rather than design, i.e., the universe, in order to exist at all, cannot be any other way. To elaborate on this point, Hume drew on the work of Epicurus, an ancient Greek scholar who believed that all things were composed only of atoms and the space between them. Prior to the beginning of everything, these atoms or particles may well have been in a random state, moving without purpose or order. Yet, as these particles randomly came into contact with each other and made combinations, those combinations that worked effectively in the environment they were in persisted in their combinations. Those that didn't work would have split apart. In fact, this is like a kind of survival of the fittest, where order would have emerged from chaos out of pure necessity, where it couldn't really be any other way. Hume wouldn't have known anything about Darwinism or natural selection because it was after his time, but this is the kind of explanation that would be an alternative to a designer. This is necessity, not design.